Okay, so NGINX is probably most well known as being a web server. So there's over 400 million websites that run NGINX as the core web server. It recently surpassed Apache as the #1 web server in market share. And later, Kevin is going to go through a little bit of the history in terms of who founded it and why. What I'll just say is if you kind of think about the original thesis behind NGINX, it was, okay, we've created a web server, but there's all these bumps in a wire you have to put in front of a web server to help it perform well, to make it scalable, to make it secure. So this is right around the time that application delivery controllers were kind of coming online. And so what we found is, hey, if we can actually make those a set of programmable capabilities inherent to the web server, then we can collapse a lot of that infrastructure that kind of sits at the north-south door in front of all of that. We also now have a new application server, not just a web server, and you'll be getting a demo of that today. Those are kind of the core technologies that make up NGINX. But because we also have roots in networking, where we see a lot of the traffic management, the authentication, the security in and out of these servers, we have a kind of a privileged place in the network, and we see a lot of different application patterns. So what we're going to talk about today and what we're going to show you guys are some of the use cases for NGINX where we have those interesting touch points in the network. And I'll touch on them in a second. So let me show you a quick, I know this is a little bit of a cumbersome eye diagram, but this is actually, it's a real customer diagram. I've removed their name to protect the innocent. And this is actually a simplified version of their diagram. They don't have every vendor on this slide, but basically what we find is that most customers today have applications as their core competitive advantage, and they're trying to figure out how do I take the code that makes up that app and deliver it to my customer as fast as possible. The volume that I can do that at, the velocity I can do that at, is what is important for my competitive advantage in the industry. But to do that, you may have your legacy applications that are made up of traditional web server Java and all of the infrastructure that's in front of that. You might have new microservices and containerized applications, all the networking infrastructure sits in front of that. And then a complex data path, and you guys are probably familiar enough with these acronyms that I don't have to read them off to you, but there's a complex set of technologies that are needed to provide the security, the performance, the reliability for those different applications. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned, I did it on purpose, is NGINX was actually acquired by F5. So F5 Networks now is the parent company. You can kind of think of NGINX as a part of F5. And what we've done is thought about it from the application out, and F5 was doing a good job of thinking about this from kind of the user in. And so our vision for how this may come together is more this. And so what we have here is you can see there's a whole bunch of NGINX use cases. I'm going to spend a lot more time touching on those, so I won't get into it. But really, the way you can think about it, the reason why F5 acquired us is because they handle a lot of the north-south traffic that comes in and out of your application estate. They've done a good job collapsing a lot of those functionalities into a single device, whether it be hardware or software, that provides those services. NGINX took a different approach. We sit closer to the application. We also provide this similar set of services, but we do it highly distributed. So although I'm only showing a single instance here, you can imagine that you'd spin up thousands. I mean, NGINX is only about 2 megs. In fact, at Cloud Field Day, we fit it on a floppy drive, and we actually gave everyone NGINX on a floppy disk. We had to give them a floppy drive to boot the floppy disk because no one has those anymore. And all running on Raspberry Pi because NGINX can be compiled on ARM processors. So we have a very different philosophy, lightweight, highly distributed. So we handle all the east-west traffic that sits closer to that. And there's a very coordinated handoff we can do between that kind of gateway level device, like a big IP, and more the distributed back-end services that we would do as part of NGINX.
Thanks.
Now, part of the thing is there's therefore a large diversity of folks that touch both F5 and NGINX. F5 is predominantly for network administrators and folks that are closer to the network. NGINX kind of got its roots with developers that download the open source as part of their application, and then eventually makes its way into more of the DevOps audience that needs to then run that. And then we kind of meet in the middle. So there's somewhere in some of our technologies where network admins may set up a large NGINX instance to handle load balancing and authentication. or again, it may be in coordination with a big IP that sits in front doing that. So our vision, though, is that we can collapse a lot of those complex tool chain that was needed to deliver that code to customer data path by having it as the NGINX platform closer to the app and the big IP platform closer to the doorstep of the data center and out to the user. Now, one thing I won't touch on is F5 also has cloud services, so we actually can provide hosted DNS, even looking at things like CDNs, which is a common use case for NGINX technologies. Okay, I know I'm going kind of fast, but I want to get through this stuff quickly. So if I take that same basic data path and visualize it as all these different elements along the bottom, these are all basically use cases for NGINX and NGINX Plus. By the way, NGINX is our open source. NGINX Plus is the commercial version. NGINX Plus not only is a supported, but it actually has features and capabilities that are unique to that version. So we're an open core business model, if you will, meaning that the only difference with our commercial offering isn't just support. We actually have capabilities that lend themselves to these different use cases. And then what we do is we service NGINX up into controller. So controller, which we're not going to get into in much depth today, is our central UI, central management. It's what allows us to plug into additional DevOps tooling and tool chain. It's what allows us to export out to things like your favorite application performance monitoring or logging type things. And really the reason why we came out with controller is it allows two things. First, it allows everyone who needs to configure NGINX for a particular use case to have their own specific workflow. So if I'm a network admin and I care more about the ADC and the traffic policies, I can log in and get a very different look and feel than if I'm an app owner and I care about the APIs in and out of that application, I'm trying to set API lifecycles, right? So we allow a lot of different roles to interact with controller, and that's how we get the ability to collapse down to a large number of use cases, but without exploding the complexity where everyone has to log in and handle different policies. So controller is the engine that helps us do that. And then finally, we do self-service, right? So whether you want to open it up to an application owner so they can get their particular view, or for example, if you're doing full lifecycle API management, if you want to be able to publish your API, document the API. So there's different capabilities that all get exposed through controller. But what we really wanted to do was focus today on more the networking, the data path. And this is my last slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with one of the most prevalent use cases for NGINX, which is as a Kubernetes ingress controller. So about 64% of all Kubernetes ingress controllers run on NGINX, about another 15% are F5. So between the two of us, the vast majority of Kubernetes networking, at least on the ingress side, is handled with either NGINX or F5. So we want to talk about why that's the case, and that'll be our first set of content for you. Then we're going to segue to the new networked application server that we have called Unit. It is currently an open source project, and it will allow us to kind of show you a little bit about where we're going from a technology perspective. And then we'll segue, and trust me, it'll be a smooth segue, to probably the most prevalent NGINX use case, which is using it as a load balancer and some of the more traditional NGINX-like features. So we'll show a little bit of a demo and some capability and give you some background there. And then what we want to do is end on where we're going with service mesh. So not sure if you guys are following that space with what's going on with Istio and Envoy and the kind of east-west sidecar proxy type architecture. That's a perfect use case for a lightweight technology like ours. We don't have a demo for you, but we do want to at least talk you through what we're doing in that space. I do think we have a different approach. And so we brought one of the engineers who's actually working on that project as well. So this is kind of the lineup in terms of what we're going to do over the next hour and a half or so. All right, so with that said, unless you have particular questions, again, I just wanted to make it short and sweet and get out of the way, and then let the technology shine through. Any
Real
thoughts?
quick question on
Yeah?
load balancing. You listed Citrix as one of your customers.
Oh, sorry. Back to that slide?
Yeah.
Competitor.
Originally.
Those are,
Well, that was competitors.
yeah, those are
Okay, I
competing
misunderstood.
products that we would, yeah. So that was not a customer slide. The diagram was cribbed from a customer.
Gotcha.
And then those are the typical decisions we see those customers making, is we have to have a layer 4 load balancer, a layer 7 load balancer, an API, so on and so forth.
Okay.
So yeah, we compete with Citrix.
Not a super technical question, but with the acquisition by F5, has that changed anything for you guys? Or just still business as usual?
By and large, we're a fully owned business unit that sits within F5 with our own kind of sales, marketing, tech engine. So by and large, not much has changed. If anything, F5 has given us a lot of resources. So the day the acquisition closed, we inherited 150 more developers. That was really handy. So it's helping bring product to market faster, given the breadth and depth of their resources. The other thing, and this is going to sound a little bit funny coming from a traditional open source company, it's allowing us to do more in the open source domain as well. When NGINX was a little old standalone company, we were about 250 employees total. You have to make a fine line decision between how many resources are going towards the commercial product and how many resources are continuing to develop the open source project. But now that we have 150, so our business unit alone is over 400 employees now, we're able to invest in both. And so we've been able to increase open source, which is something that if you talk to folks in our community, they're a little bit worried about. So let us show you over time that we are definitely not being assimilated into the Borg, and that we are continuing to still do things the way we've always done them, if not just a little bit faster.